Let's welcome IRF Secretariat founder Greg Mitchell, the Executive Vice President of the Religious Freedom Institute, Eric Patterson, and former Senior Bureau Official for International Organization Affairs, Pam Pryor.
Hello, good morning still. Almost noon.
This is, by the way, this was BYOB.
Yeah. All right. Again, good morning. We've reached the closing segment. I mean, there's still a couple more speakers here, but this really is the closing segment of the plenary program this year. So for the most part, all the talk is now done. You know, and the title of this final segment is Where Do We Go From Here? You know, the talk is done, and now it's time for action. So really the question is what are we going to do? You know, what are we going to do when we all go home from here? And so we've got a distinguished panel, and Farahnaz Ispahani has joined us. So we have Pam Pryor, Eric Patterson, and Farahnaz Ispahani. They're going to share some ideas on where we go from here. And not only their ideas, but you remember at the beginning of the summit, or even before the summit, we had invited opening statements with innovative solutions from all the participants. So you know we're going to highlight some of those. We also invited policy recommendations that we shared with the ministerial team in London. So we had a lot of people submit policy recommendations that the International Religious Freedom or Belief Alliance of Governments is considering as they prepare for their ministerial next week. You know, and so we have a lot of good ideas that have been submitted by you, by civil society, by the organizers and conveners of this summit, basically. So we looked through all those, and we're going to just share our ideas about where we go from here and what are we going to do now that we're coming to the close of this summit. So I'll start with Pam Pryor.
Well, thank you so much, and it really is a joy for me to be here today. This is my fourth IRF summit since we started them back in 2018. We had two ministerials, many of you will remember, under Secretary Pompeo. And then you also might remember we had the very first ever historic UN event with President Trump and UN Secretary Guterres. And now in our second civil society-led event. And you know, I really love the camaraderie of these events. Sometimes the most important things at these events happens in the networking. And for all of you that I said I still need to see you. And I'm glad I got to have lunch with Todd Chastain yesterday because I think he's leaving. But the other thing is I can't think of better people to lead these events than Katrina Lantos-Sweat or Sam Brownback. There is just, there's a beauty in the fact that they come from two different places. And I've got a great story. Greg, can I go back in the Wayback Machine to start? So if we go back in the Wayback Machine, I remember when your IRF roundtables were 10 to 15 people. Do you remember that? You had no gray hair and you did not have a beard then. And now you number over 100. People, not years, people. And I remember also the time after Sam Brownback was finally confirmed that we held that first event. We had a bunch of people, and he said, we're going to do these every week. And you and I gasped. And I remember saying, you know what? Maybe if we just don't make eye contact with Sam Brownback for a few weeks, maybe he'll forget about that. Well, he did not forget about it. And we kept meeting, and it was the best thing that ever happened. And really, it led to this thing that we're doing. So it was the exact right thing to do, and this summit this time is the fruit of that. And by the way, congrats on naming Nadine Manza, too, to walk along as your president. So anyway, let me just quickly zip along to, I know that despite the work that we all do on religious freedom, more groups helping out, the IRF Act that's a quarter of a century old almost, And the proposals that we've shown, I think, show a real sophistication. I think we've grown, we've learned. And the thing is, as much as we continue to grow, there is more persecution. And I don't want that for you all to think that's because we're doing something wrong. I think there's more persecution because there are just people with really dark hearts and despots and dictators and malign governments on this issue. And it's a sign that there's evil. But I just also want you to remember that greater is he that is in us than he that is in the world. And we can make a difference. Thank you. Thanks. I invited my mom and my 2 sisters here today. No, but it is true. And I think the fact that we're seeing more collaboration, and nowhere was that more evident than in the evacuation of Afghanistan. I saw civil society come together in a way that was never done. In fact, how many of you worked on Afghan refugees or Ukrainian refugees? Yes, I mean, at least half of this house. And that was the kind of collaboration, Greg, that we're seeing. And a lot of that is thanks to the Roundtable and Templeton allowing us to do this. So thank you for that. You know, they say there's only 2 things you should never talk about, and that's faith and politics. Well, that's exactly my life, has been faith and politics. But the fact that people are uncomfortable talking about faith is precisely why we have this problem. We should talk about that. My goodness, we talk about all kinds of uncomfortable things nowadays. But when we don't talk about faith, or you choose even not to have faith and talk about that, that's when bad things happen. So this conversation, what we're doing, is really important. Because sometimes I hear, well, the last thing we need is another talk fest. Well, this isn't a talk fest, and we're going to get to the exact proposals. And just one other thing before I get there. It is always so good to meet the people that we prayed for, the persecuted, the prisoners. I heard Frank Wolf talk about Andrew Brunson. Yesterday, Mariam Ibrahim spoke on a panel at lunch, and she talked about how she didn't know that there were people praying for her and working for her release. And think how lonely that is. But I will never forget meeting Mariam for the first time and knowing that we had prayed and worked, and now we got to hug her. And my prayer is that maybe next year, please, we'll have Cardinal Zhen with us. We can't forget him, or Pastor Cao in China, or the husbands of the wives of the persecuted Christians in China. We have to have those people back with us. You know, I went to church last night, and Lord willing, I'll go again Sunday. And I go without any fear of being jailed or attacked. And may we, I want to just speak to those of you in the U.S., may we never take that right for granted. That's why we need to work on domestic religious freedom with the same fervor that we work on international, because if we fail, the example to the rest of the world fails. And I just want to also, Greg, remind you that when we went in the Wayback Machine, there was a time when nobody knew what a Uyghur was. And they thought, are you saying Weaver? You know, they didn't know what it was. And it was because we were relentless in that now Uyghurs are a household name. And that's the other thing we need to do. We need to make religious freedom a household, just like we do anti-trafficking or anti-hunger. And so that's important. As far as the 2 tracks that I wanted to say, and Eric reminded me, you heard a lot about anti-Semitism this morning, but I love that we had a track on that this year. And I also love the fact that we had a track for women in religious freedom, not just because I am a woman, and by the way, I know the definition of what I am, but because I think it is, you know what? Moms know best, right? Moms know that you don't bully people or treat people ugly. And moms know when their sons go off to a terrorist organization. They cry for them. They want them back. So I am thrilled to see the work that's been doing just even on wearing a hijab. That should be, if that's an expression of their faith, we should all fight for that kind of thing. So those were 2 things that I really loved. I mean, ADF, 21 Wilberforce, RFI, Samaritan's Purse. Everybody does good work, and there's so many things here, but I know that we have to hurry, so I'm going to let you go on.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you. Eric.
Well, Greg, thank you very much for all your work on this conference. And let me just start by saying, my thanks to Sam Brownback, to Katrina Lantos-Sweat, to the organizing committee, to Peter Burns and that team, and all these interns working behind the scenes as volunteers. Thank you. I know we all thank you very, very much for your work on this event. And my remarks are about what motivates us, and then pointing to one gap, and then 5 points of light very quickly. First, we heard last night from Bishop Timoteo, and he said to us that what should be motivating us, what should be animating us, is love. And that's something that makes this conference so different from other human rights legal conferences or activism conferences. I have to tell you, those are often the angriest, most bitter, mean-spirited events that you could possibly go to. But here, there's a sense of hope that comes from love of God and love of neighbor. I think we have to be consistently reminding ourselves that the mission proceeds from love of others first and foremost. Now, I will say that one thing that I think that we learned from last year is that there really are much more of a presence of people working on the ground in the field and voices who have experienced persecution themselves in a way that was a constructive criticism that some made last year, and we've made great strides in that this year. And I want to come back to that in a moment. Let me say one gap, I think, is that we need to slow down and learn the lessons of the draconian government restrictions that we endured during COVID-19, the scapegoating of religious minorities, not just in the Middle East, but in New York City and other places. It wasn't just overreach, it was real signals of authoritarianism. And some of the most vulnerable populations experienced it. Prisoners didn't have religious services available to them in prisons. People who were very ill couldn't have a hospital chaplain come in. No last rites, no practice of the sacraments in different faith traditions, no religious burials. Imagine if your loved one died in a hospital and then was buried in some grave, but you could not participate or go through your religiously informed rites in any of that process. This list could go on and on. It's not just Algeria that still has churches shut. The churches were shut well into last year in Scotland. It wasn't just India, it was California, it was Canada. And I think we need to be looking very carefully at the lessons learned in legislative fixes to protect religious individuals, religious institutions, and faith communities. COVID, we can't let the lessons learned from that go by the wayside. Now, let me mention a few points. Thanks. Let me mention a few points of light, some of the things from the proposals that were printed that I think are particularly relevant for us as we go forward. And I want to mention 5 of them quickly. The first is that there's a Open Doors and RFI protocol for documenting religious freedom violations, particularly for the most vulnerable migrant communities or those who are persecuted and have had to flee their country. This is important as a best practice for governments, and so getting government adoption or NGO contractor adoption of standards like these would be a real win for religious freedom. It's a practical step. Second one, I've heard a lot about it, but we need to see investment in youth-oriented media and social media campaigns. But what we need is things like Schoolhouse Rock for religious freedom. We need memes and those cool little Google videos that you click on right above the search engine that tell a story or a book. You may have seen the one from this week was the story of Anne Frank. It's masterfully done. It's in front of millions of users every single day. And we really haven't had user-friendly, positive religious freedom, positive pluralism, those types of messages in those types of places where our young people will see them. And what we're good at are speeches and books and articles, right? And we need to be better in communicating, and there's several initiatives here about how to communicate better. Third, we need to press the ministerial next week to make a formal governmental statement on religious freedom, and in specific, to protect the rights of morally orthodox communities, not just abroad, but at home, to freely practice their faith, individuals, institutions, and faith-based organizations. Fourth, I think an important one that we've seen is that we have to engage big media and big social media like we did at this conference. We need to hold them accountable. And at the same time, religious communities and religious freedom advocates are going to have to invest heavily in alternative platforms for communication, for cooperation, and for finance. And then the last one that particularly excites me has to do with replication of this event. Yesterday, I heard a college in the South that has decided that they're going to run a one-day International Religious Freedom Conference in their community, and they've already figured out the demographics of who are the big diaspora communities in their backyard so that they can get voices of people who've had to flee for persecution, who are their neighbors, getting the chance to talk about that. BYU has done a similar thing in the past, and I think that type of replication of taking this to Dallas, taking this to Atlanta, taking this to Los Angeles, and local communities, local houses of worship, and schools running it is a great outcome from this conference. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you, Eric. And building on that last point, that's one of the things that we're going to be focused on is this summit here catalyzing summits. In other countries, so we can have regional summits or national summits in other countries, but like you said, even local summits. We can have local summits throughout the United States, and we're even talking about setting up religious freedom roundtables in several cities, so a national network of religious freedom roundtables in the United States. Because I think with our roundtable in Washington, it's done a great job at building mutual respect, trust, and reliance between faith communities, faith and belief communities, which builds social cohesion, but in this small policy community. But imagine if we were doing that all over the country and having the same results all over the country, and maybe these summits and these events in cities across the U.S. and across the world can help to catalyze the establishment of roundtables.
And Greg, do you remember when we had the goal of 100? In fact, Eric, it was right before COVID hit. In late 19, we talked about having 100 IRF roundtables around the world. I think we should go back to that. I think we should go big or go home. Let's go ahead and let's dust off that project. And I know you've been several places already, Guatemala, Poland, and
there's summits. You saw there were several countries that were on the stage here at this summit. President of Guatemala was here yesterday. We met with him again after he spoke. We're going to plan a regional summit there, probably in November. Uzbekistan, Indonesia, Qatar. You saw we signed an MOU with one of the big institutions in Qatar, and we're going to do a summit there as well. So all these summits that we're going to have around the world, again, I think is designed to help us get to that 100 roundtable goal. Yeah. So those are things that we can work on for sure, going home from this summit this year. Now I want to turn to Farahnaz Ispahani. We're very fortunate, very blessed to have you join us. She's with the International Panel of Parliamentarians for Freedom of Religion or Belief, and she's going to give us some updates on what that international panel is doing. And she's also a former member of the National Assembly of Pakistan. So we're very grateful you're here, Farahnaz.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you so much, Greg, for all your efforts for religious freedom. Thank you to all of you, and obviously Ambassador Brownback and Katrina Lantos-Sweat. But there are so many other people, even though we call it a small policy community. I would call out people like Nina Shea and many others like her who have been fighting for the rights of others to pray, to be safe from persecution all over the world, and she is still doing that. The reason I'm here today is we're talking about what now? And on IPP4, which is the International Panel for Parliamentarians for Human Rights, we have 300 sitting parliamentarians all over the globe who are part of our network. And I'm part of the steering group, which has 6 members. 3 of them are sitting members of parliament, the Honorable Kwanka from South Africa, the Honorable Abid Raja from Norway, and the Honorable Kasuri Pato from Malaysia. David Anderson, our chair, has spent over 5 terms in the Canadian Parliament. Aykan Erdemir, a former Turkish lawmaker, is also on our steering group, and myself. So we have 3 present and 3 former. And the strength in that is that the people who are currently lawmakers are doing what we all want to do here. We are not the UN. We don't want to have a lot of talks and pass a resolution. We want to be in the state houses. We want to be on the parliament floor, calling attention to all of the issues we talk about. We are part of working with and assisting the change makers. So our news today from IPP4 is we have incorporated to make ourselves stronger, leaner, fitter. And that means that we will still continue to have our secretariat in Norway, but we've incorporated in Canada and intend to do so in the near future in many other countries. So there's a strength in assisting and training those members of parliament. We do not push for, but those who are interested from anywhere in the world, we help hear out what their issues are and assist them, educate them on the best way forward, dealing with whether it's hate speech, forced conversion issues, issues to do with blasphemy and apostasy on the floor of the House. So that is what I am here today to announce, and I hope all of you look up IPP4 on our website. You will see our steering committee, of which I'm a member, and see what the work we do, and perhaps pass the news on to lawmakers from your countries if your countries are free. Thank you so much to all of you for giving me this opportunity. I'm also a proud senior fellow at the Religious Freedom Institute, which I can never forget, and a founder of the New Women's Forum Alliance. So many hats, but working all the time. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Farahnaz. And hopefully now with the incorporation of IPP4, and I think that means you can raise money, but we look forward to increasing our coordination with you. So IRF Secretariat and our global network of civil society roundtables and partners, we'd love to coordinate more with IPP4 in the future and do joint projects together. So we're looking forward to that.
I think that's what David and all of us would like.
I think Pam had an idea, a good idea she just wrote.
I was just thinking with the IPP4, I told Greg, why not get every one of those parliamentarians to host a roundtable in their city
Great idea.
or whatever, and then we'd get to our 100 number, and we can rest. No, we can't. We can never rest. So.
Anyway, I think we need to wrap up here. There's so many good ideas. We just kind of touched on a few. I'm just going to read off two. Remember, there's 7 global campaigns too, as far as what we can do when we go home from the summit. And just a reminder, there's one on the IRF Charter, the International Religious Freedom Charter. There's a global campaign to push that out around the world and get signatures and projects. One on preventing and responding to genocide. Another one on ending the China firewall. One on combating anti-Semitism. One on ending blasphemy and apostasy. One on prisoners of conscience, and then one on women in IRF. So each of those had breakout sessions, I believe, yesterday afternoon. There's a couple of strategic regional tracks, I think one in the MENA region, the Middle East and North Africa region, that Jeremy Barker is going to be running. So, and I don't know if everybody's signed up yet, but watch your emails as we come out of here. We will be putting a lot of structure on this so that we can provide you with a structured way to opt in and activate into these global campaigns. And a lot of the things that we're talking about here, we will be designing strategic initiatives to invite you all to opt into and participate in. So we will be getting into action as we go home. So thank you very much, and I want to please give a hand to each one of our participants here. you.